Hello everyone and welcome back to our revision videos. This week we are looking at Macbeth and we're going to be looking at the theme of kingship throughout the play. So make sure you've got your pen and paper and your flashcards ready so you can be making notes. So we will start with the authorial intention, which is what we use to analyse any literature text. And throughout the play, Shakespeare questions what makes a good leader, and it's central to the plot of Macbeth. Shakespeare presents his audience with different overlapping and contrasting examples of what kingship is and what it means, and these examples are used to reveal different virtues and flaws within each character. Shakespeare uses the theme of kingship as well to warn the audience that one cannot attempt to overthrow a king, disrupt the great chain of being, and tarnish the sanctity of the divine right of kings without suffering the consequences. So he uses this play to warn audiences, of the consequences of committing regicide. We know that we assume he wrote this play as part of royalist propaganda, as we see that Shakespeare quite often tries to ingratiate himself with the monarch that was on the throne at the time. So this one obviously is King James I. So to explore the theme of kingship, it's really important obviously that we start with King Duncan, the original king and the rightful king of the throne to Scotland. Now, Shakespeare uses King Duncan's character to highlight the tyrannical anarchy of Macbeth's kingship, So looking at King Duncan's noble and virtuous characteristics, therefore, completely contradicts and acts as the antithesis to Macbeth's kingship and how he portrays himself as a king. However, King Duncan's negligence is apparent, in the play, and we see that in Act 1, Scene 2, when the captain is sort of revealing to King Duncan what's going on the battlefield. We can see that King Duncan does not take part in the battle, and he stands on the periphery of the bloodshed that occurs, And the fact that Shakespeare opens his play with a clear rebellion between the Norwegians and the traitorous Scots as well, automatically shows the audience that King Duncan quite clearly has a weakening grip on his own rule of Scotland. However, I would say that Shakespeare only subtly hints at Duncan's weaknesses, It's not quite as obvious, and you have to sort of read between the lines to understand that. So as I've just said, that Duncan is far removed from the battle that's occurring on his territory, and it's interesting that he has to question a captain, because this reveals to the audience that he doesn't have any idea of the events going on in the battle, and which we could argue this is a criticism of Duncan and his inability to maintain control. Now, by doing this, by presenting Duncan in this way, Shakespeare is in fact praising King James I, Again, we've got that evidence of Shakespeare ingratiating himself with the monarch, because what he's doing is he's alluding to King James I's ability to unify Scotland and England, because obviously he was king of both Scotland and England, So what is happening here is Shakespeare is highlighting the unforgivable qualities of a weak king to a king, so to King James I, who has brought two countries together, so his audience would recognise sort of the benefits and the good qualities King James I has. King Duncan is presented as both saintly but weak, honest but overly trusting, generous but blind to reality. And through King Duncan's character, we can see sort of the evidence of the qualities that make a good quick king, but also Shakespeare criticising the negatives to his kingship. Let's look at some key quotations looking at King Duncan's very short reign in the play Macbeth. So the first quotation I've picked is, "What bloody man is that?" And that is in reference to the captain that walks past King Duncan in Act 1, Scene 2. Now, this is Shakespeare's first indication that Duncan, okay, is blind to his subjects' true natures, okay? He's not even able to identify the identity of the soldier reporting from the battlefield, okay? Just as he cannot understand Macdonald, okay, the Thane of Cawdor, the traitorous Macdonald, and also Macbeth's deception as well, so that we're immediately being shown that this blindness when you are on the throne is really dangerous, and you have to have a really sort of ability to weed out the traitors within your midst. Now, by placing Duncan away from the battle, okay, and it being ignorant of the current state of affairs, Shakespeare's drawing our attention to his lack of awareness again, that blindness. And whether or not the audience perceives Duncan as a good role model for leadership, it's quite clear that Shakespeare consistently portrays him as the rightful king. And we see that when Macbeth is going through his options of whether to commit regicide or not, and he states that King Duncan's virtues will plead like angels. And here we can see that Macbeth has an understanding of his king's integrity, okay, and religious sensibility. Shakespeare repeatedly employs religious imagery when describing Duncan, which reinforces the idea that committing regicide is a sacrilegious act. And that obviously links back to the great chain of being and the divine right of kings, okay? That idea that kings were placed on the throne by God, okay, themselves. And to demonstrate this further, this idea that Shakespeare was proving throughout the play Macbeth, is this idea that when King Duncan is murdered by Macbeth, chaos then ensues in the rest of the play. And this is quite identified when it says, "Dark night strangles the travelling lamp." And this is said by Ross in Act 2, Scene 4, okay? And what we see here, and if you remember from the previous video for the motif of darkness, is that the darkness referenced here is metaphorical as well as quite literal, okay? What Ross is indicating that is that there's a shift, okay? And the use of this motif of darkness exemplifies how Scotland, okay, and King Duncan himself is characterised by morality, and now it has been transformed into one of villainy and distrust. And through Macbeth's action of regicide, it means that the darkness has come and actively enshrouded the earth, okay, the very day after the light of the country, which is King Duncan himself, has been extinguished. And what we have here is Shakespeare warning his audience of what would happen if somebody sought the throne through immoral actions, okay? Okay, so now we need to move on to Macbeth, okay, because King Duncan has been murdered and Macbeth has now acquired the throne. So, what is Shakespeare trying to say about kingship through Macbeth's reign? So he's using Macbeth's character to reveal that kingship cannot be sustained if sought through deception and tyranny. He also reveals the consequences of usurping a king and committing regicide. And what he's trying to prove to his audience is that an illegitimate king can only ever be a tyrant who relies on acts of violence and destruction to maintain the throne. Okay? There's no way that morality, okay, is a part of kingship when it's been acquired through regicide. And what we see throughout the play is Macbeth's thirst for power drives him, okay? He craves kingship, and when he actually achieves this, he then turns his focus to securing absolute control of Scotland, okay, through Machiavellian means, okay, completely tyrannical means. Now, Macbeth commits the ultimate sin, which is regicide, in order to steal the crown for himself. But this spiralling ambition becomes heightened by his fear of losing everything. Okay, it's really interesting. So when Macbeth gains the throne, okay, that's just not enough for him, because he is haunted by the reminder that he doesn't have any heirs that can like the throne can be passed down to. And it's this obsession with maintaining and sustaining the longevity of his throne. Okay, so there's quotation analysis for Macbeth and the theme of kingship. Now, there are a multitude of quotations you can select to analyse for Macbeth and his sort of journey to the throne, his time on the throne, and then obviously the end of his reign. I've chosen three, and one of them we've already mentioned, but it's quite interesting to look at it from Macbeth's perspective. So the first one is unseen him from the nave to the chaps. So it's that, again, linking back to that speech from the captain who relays the information of the battlefield to King Duncan, okay? And what we see here for an audience is Macbeth's innate savagery, okay? Shakespeare's foreshadowing how Macbeth will use brutality to his advantage. And what we have here is Shakespeare encouraging the audience to mistrust Macbeth immediately, okay? And that's really clear that his motives may supersede just mere loyalty to his king, okay? An audience is expected to question the reasoning behind Macbeth's brutality in the battle between the Norwegians and, the loyal Scotsmans. And it's this idea that we are being warned of just how someone could use their ambition to get the throne. And additionally, not only do we see the sort of juxtaposition between King Duncan's blindness and his willingness to trust someone, but we also see, firstly, Macbeth's ability in battle and to lead soldiers in the battle. And here we can see that clearly through the description from the captain that Macbeth has been able to garner the respect and the obedience of the troops by leading the charge, okay? And this sort of emphasises how the king appears physically weak and lacks the courage of the play's military leaders. So there we can see Shakespeare sort of laying out to his audience the qualities of good kingship, okay? So yes, we've got, Macbeth is sinful, immoral, okay, but we have got that hint that a king should be a good leader. And then we've got that quotation again where Macbeth has his doubts over killing King Duncan because he's recognising that his king is a noble and humble leader who is completely free from any corruption and self-indulgence, unlike Macbeth, okay? And although Shakespeare has subtly hinted to Duncan's weaknesses as a king, he's clearly a king with no moral ambiguity. So we can clearly see that King Duncan is the antithesis to Macbeth, and maybe Shakespeare's using this moment to reveal to King James to be sort of astute and watchful of his lords, okay, and the people beneath him, because it's quite clear that sort of that nobleness and that humbleness can be taken advantage of pretty quickly. And then finally, we've got the description of Macbeth once he's been defeated by Macduff. And this is Malcom, who states that Macbeth is a dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. So what we see here is, Macbeth's reign has been suspended, obliterated, got rid of, okay? And it's almost like this final moment where we see sort of how innately savage Macbeth was, okay? because he's not only murdered the people he deemed a threat, so Banquo, well, King Duncan, Banquo, and Macduff's family, and these were all people who threatened his ambition, but he has effectively butchered Scotland itself, okay? And it's this idea that Shakespeare's encouraging his audience to have this sort of loyalty and admiration for the country that they live in. And the last character we're going to look at is Malcolm, okay? So King Duncan's son and rightful heir to the throne. Now, Malcolm is the true heir to the throne, and he is presented by Shakespeare as being very intelligent because he tests his followers' loyalty, so he tests Macduff. Yet he does not lead his own troops, and his Machiavellian approach to leadership is somewhat calculating, okay? So he's very clever and very astute. Malcolm shows that he does not have the same gullible characteristics as his father, as I've just said, he tests Macduff's loyalty because he fears that Macbeth is attempting to use Macduff to lure him back to Scotland to be killed, okay? Now, this is very evident that it's political shrewdness, and it's something that his father did not possess, and therefore proves that once Macbeth is defeated and Malcolm takes his rightful place on the throne, Scotland will be healed, okay? So what we can see here is these elements of kingship that Shakespeare's quite clearly and visibly supporting, okay? This idea that he is showing the audience that a leader, okay, a good king is somebody who is intelligent and has this knowledge and understanding of politics, okay, within the people who are beneath him, okay, but also the people that he puts his trust into. Let's look at some key quotations for Malcolm, okay, and how that he links to the theme of kingship. So the first one we're going to look at is from Act 1, Scene 4, okay, and this is the moment that King Duncan announces to his thanes that Malcolm is to be the Prince of Cumberland, okay. So after the loyalty shown by Macbeth in the battle between the Norwegians, the traitorous Scotsman and the loyal Scotsman, okay, and this title, okay, is what identifies Scotland's heir. Now, you've got to remember that in the 11th century, the Scottish crown didn't work the same way as it does, you know, in our country now, and years before that. So the Scottish crown wasn't hereditary, okay, it wasn't something that you were born into. The heirs were chosen, and most often not chosen by actual thanes, not by the kings themselves. So there's some sort of it's interesting looking at sort of why Shakespeare's chosen King Duncan, okay, to announce the heir. Now, this further proves that the play is a piece of royalist propaganda, okay, because King James I strongly believed in the succession by primogeniture, okay, which is the idea that just the elder son ascended the throne. And here we've got Duncan pointedly naming his son as the next King of Scotland, which King James I would have supported. And furthermore, what we see here is that because Malcolm has been named the next heir, okay, it is believed, the divine right of kings is unbroken, okay, but it is then broken because Macbeth takes the crown for himself. The next quotation is really interesting, okay, and it's the moment between Malcolm and Macduff, okay, where Malcolm is ascertaining Macduff's loyalty and he's testing him to see whether he can trust him. And in this moment, Malcolm lists off all the qualities of an immoral king, okay, but then he also lists off all the qualities of what makes a good king, okay. Now here you've got a king becoming graces as justice, verity, temperance, stableness, and the list goes on for actually 3 lines, okay. Now Shakespeare's using asyndetic listing here. So asyndetic listing is the use of listing that's not been broken up by connectives, okay? So it doesn't say graces and justice and verity, okay? Now, this is to reinforce the qualities in which a king should possess, okay? And this list directly opposes the qualities that Macbeth himself has. If you look at that word verity, that word verity means to be true, okay? And Macbeth himself is the serpent hidden beneath the innocent flower, okay? And therefore he does not possess this verity. And again, we've got that reference to Macbeth being the dead butcher, okay? And what Shakespeare's highlighting here is that the new king will deliberately avoid using violence and corruption, and he will favour generosity and morality, okay? Now, what we can see here is that Malcom actually mimics his father's characteristics, which must emphasise the importance of having that morality in order to be a good king. So therefore we can see that Shakespeare is supportive of kings being generous, but also in order to maintain a stable throne, okay, they must also, that must be paired with somebody who is politically intelligent, okay, which is very different to how Duncan is presented at the very beginning of the play. Okay, so there we have it, a quick whistle-stop tour of Kingship. There is so much more that we could cover, but maybe I'll do another supporting video in a few weeks' time, looking at it in a little bit more depth, but that will get us started.